Okay, welcome all to this academic ceremony. I open this academic ceremony as the chair of this session. My name is Jos Lemming, and I'm Emeritus Professor at Maastricht University. And I open this academic ceremony in which Amira Gamal El-Din will defend the academic thesis, Resilience of Public Organizations, the case of the education sector in Egypt. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Thank you, dear Prorector, dear members of the Assessment Committee and Corona, dear supervisory team, dear family and friends, thank you very much for being here today. I am going to provide a brief presentation about my research on the resilience of public organizations, the case of the education sector in Egypt. We face the greatest cascade of crises in our lifetime. These are the words of the UN Secretary General, referring to the rapid and consecutive disruptions around the world. Can you remember this? Our global shared moments of fear, darkness, and uncertainty, where we were pushed into new reality. The COVID-19 pandemic is one of the most disruptive events in our modern history that exposed vulnerabilities in our public institutions' capacity to face disruptive events. And here, resilience became a necessity, raising a critical question. Can our public organizations anticipate, cope, and adapt with disruptive events? My presentation will focus on four key parts. The first is the overview of the research, and then the research design and methodology, moving to the key findings and conclusion, and then concluding with the key recommendations. The COVID-19 pandemic was a real test for our public organizations' capacity to face disruptions. It showed limitations in the service delivery and also showed decrease in citizen satisfaction. And this has intensified calls for more new service delivery models and for more resilient organizations. In my research, organizational resilience refers to as the organization's ability to face disruptive events and to move into a better state in order, through their anticipation and coping capabilities, in order to face disruptions. Actually, the case of Egypt, education sector in Egypt can provide a good example of organizational resilience. Despite the challenges, the sector showed resilience during COVID-19, which is reflected in the improvement in the international indices related to education. And this can provide insights into how Egypt navigated through disruption. In order to understand how organizational resilience can contribute to building more adaptive, capable, and future-ready public organizations, the research focuses on three key questions. The first is focusing on the assessment of organizational resilience. The second focuses on the case of Egypt, the observed dimensions and drivers of resilience in the case of Egypt. And the third focuses on the use of policy tools or government choices across the phases of disruption. Moving to the research methodology and design. In order to answer the research question, the study employed a qualitative analysis using two key analytical tools. The first one is the Organizational Resilience Assessment Tool, which is a tool that incorporates the capabilities and drivers of resilience before, during, and after the disruption. The second tool is the policy tools, the NATO taxonomy, which reflects the government choices when it comes to modality, authority, territory, and organization. The study uses a case study approach, focusing on the pre-university education in Egypt during COVID-19 pandemic. And as for the data collection, the literature review of the different documents related to the education sector in Egypt was reviewed, in addition to the documents published by education organizations. A total of 22 interviews with government officials and experts were conducted, in addition to the review of the social media outlets with a special focus on the Facebook pages of education organizations. In terms of the data analysis, given the temporal nature of the study, a process tracing approach was employed in order to draw the causal inferences to understand organizational resilience. Also, thematic analysis was used to unpack the complex relationships between the different dimensions and drivers of resilience. In addition to abductive analysis or pattern matching approach was used in order to compare the theoretical patterns with the real observations to build a new theory, which is reflected in the theoretical conclusion of the study, which is the redesigned organizational resilience theoretical framework, as we will see in a bit. And this takes us to the key findings and conclusion of the research. The findings addressing the research question related to the use of policy tools across the phases of disruption. As I said earlier, I used the NATO taxonomy, nodality, authority, territory, and organizations. In terms of the nodality, which are the tools that reflect or focus on the communication and dissemination of information, there's a shift from the use of traditional tools such as the use of faxes, the use of official letters before COVID-19, into more emerging tools during COVID-19, like the extensive use of emails, the Zoom, social media, and then resting into a combination between the traditional and emerging tools after COVID-19, reflecting a real shift in the communication practices of education organizations. As for the authority tools, the system before COVID-19 was centralized. And this centralized system allowed for decentralization during COVID-19, and this is reflected in the delegation of authority during COVID-19. For example, the local level had the opportunity to make decisions regarding school closure during COVID-19, but this was temporary and the system remained centralized after COVID-19. In terms of the treasury, the finance, state budget, loans, and grants were observed across the three phases of disruption. However, the extra funding and the support received from the social network were observed during COVID-19. In terms of the organizational tools, when it comes to the planning function before COVID-19 was focusing on the strategic planning function. And this is reflected in the different plans and the education sector plan before COVID-19. But with COVID, this planning function moved to more operational level planning, which is reflected in the coping plan initiated by the Ministry of Education, and then reverted back to the strategic level function planning after COVID-19. The crisis management function also witnessed a clear change from the affiliation to the security department before COVID-19 to the affiliation to the strategic planning department after COVID-19, reflecting a clear learning at the organizational level when it comes to the crisis management function. The findings addressing the research question related to the observed dimensions and drivers of resilience in the case of Egypt showed that despite the limited anticipation capacity of education organizations during COVID-19, the education organizations showed sound coping at both the central and local level. And this was complemented by the coherence of the policy tools with the overall strategic direction of the education sector. Also, disruption opened the door for more resilient thinking, and this is reflected in the new education sector plan after COVID-19. Additionally, the existence of emergency planning did not correlate with the resilience of education organizations during COVID-19. However, the coping plan initiated by the Ministry of Planning was very beneficial in managing the disruption. The analysis also shows that the organizations learned at both individual and organization level. For example, at the individual level, employees improve their managerial skills, and particularly this is at the local level, and maybe because of the delegated authority during COVID-19. And then also at the organizational level, for example, the organizations learned how to deal with the digital learning tools during COVID-19. Disruption induces changes, and this is reflected in the acceptance of the education reform program during COVID-19 and the use of digital tools after high level of resistance before COVID-19. Financial resources were limited and were more limited at the local level. However, the support received from the civil society organizations, the private sector, and development partners was very beneficial during COVID-19, especially at the local level. The findings related to the question of assessing organization resilience. Actually, this is a core contribution of this research. The use of the abductive analysis by comparing the theoretical patterns from the initial theoretical framework with the real observations showed the need for redesigning the theoretical framework. From the framework that has clear distinction between the adaptation and coping phases to a more dynamic and cyclic approach that considers the fact that adaptation occurs with coping. And from the linear coping to an approach that considers the dynamisms and variation of coping capabilities throughout the disruption. And from a theoretical framework that does not consider the coherence between the different policy tools and government choices during disruption to a framework that considers the coherence between the policy tools. So the redesigned organization resilience theoretical framework perceives organization resilience from a cyclic, temporal, and dynamic perspective that considers continuous adaptation. And this takes us to the key recommendations of the research. At the policy level, despite the fact that education organizations showed coherence between the policy tools during the disruption during COVID-19, this coherence was lacking before and after disruption. Maintaining coherence between the policy tools is very important for future anticipation and coping with future disruptions. Also, it is important to incorporate and consider the negative impact of the disruption into the education organization's plans and policies. One example is the Learning Losses Program, which was initiated between the Ministry of Education and the UNICEF. And this program was initiated to overcome the learning losses in certain governing aids. However, there are other certain negative consequences that should be incorporated into the plans of education organizations. In terms of the anticipation-related recommendations, the analysis shows that Egypt education organizations lack anticipation capacities, and therefore there is a need to invest in the strategic foresight and emergency planning capacities in order to face future disruptions. One lesson learned from the case of Egypt is the incorporation of the equity and responsiveness measures during COVID-19, but this is not enough. It is important to be incorporated in the emergency planning to ensure effective service delivery during further and future disruptions. In terms of the coping and adaptation-related recommendation, Egypt education organizations need to improve their crisis communication capacities and need to build crisis communication strategies. Also, the analysis shows that education organizations lack innovation capacities, and it is important to foster a culture of innovation within these organizations for future coping and better coping with future disruptions. In terms of the drivers of resilience, it is important to consider the governance approach from the emergency planning in order to ensure smooth coping with future disruptions. The case of Egypt also showed the importance of individual resilience, although it was not considered in the case. However, it is important that education organizations initiate programs and initiatives that work on building employees' resilience. And finally, education organizations should capitalize on the existing social networks, the relationship with the private sector, civil society, and development partners, and ensure a smooth cooperation and coordination with these networks for future disruptions. I hereby conclude the presentation, and I really want to say that this is just a step towards understanding public organization resilience, and I wish that future studies can build on the findings of my research to build and contribute to the body of knowledge. I thank you for your attention and looking forward to our discussion. Over to you, Parag.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. Before I open the opposition, because it's time for opposition now, before I open the opposition, I would like to mention that your supervisor is Dr. Nime at the other side of the room, then Dr. Natorsky. I don't think we have him. Yeah, we do have him now. So welcome, Dr. Natorsky. He is also at Maastricht University, UNU Merit. And then Professor Amin. And Professor Amin is from Cairo University. And they were supervising the thesis of Amira Gamal El-Din. I would like to start off with the opposition, if everything is working, by giving the floor to Professor Siegel of UNU Merit. I don't know if she is here now. Yes, I can see her. Hello. So could you please start off the discussion?
Yes. Thank you, Pro-Rector. I hope that you can hear me. So, dear candidate, I read your thesis with great interest. It tackles important research questions around the resilience of the public education system in Egypt, focusing on the very challenging time of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is an extremely relevant topic. I also really appreciated that you brought all of the information together in an insightful way, and I particularly appreciated Table 9 on page 93 of your thesis, which was extremely helpful for the reader. But my job here is not only to offer congratulations, but also to ask questions and to challenge you a bit. So I would like to push you a bit more on the methodology. You have to make a number of decisions about specific, like within your thesis, you had to make specific decisions about your specific geographical focus areas within Egypt, and you were not necessarily able to interview everyone you would have liked to. So I would like you to talk a little bit more about the effect that these decisions and your access has on the outcomes of your thesis. So can you talk a little bit about the biases or selection biases that could have been brought into your study, and how this could have possibly affected the results?
Thank you, your esteemed opponent, for the compliments and for the question. This is actually a very good question. You know, conducting research in a country like Egypt is not an easy thing. It's full of challenges, yet it provides insights and different insights into how organizational resilience work on the ground. So in terms of the methodological choices I made, you know, the public administration system in Egypt, especially when it comes to the education organizations and the education sector, is working at both the central and local level. So in order to understand how organizational resilience works and the different dimensions and drivers of resilience works, I had to work at both levels. I didn't want to just focus on the central level and leave the local level, which is the more closer to citizens and more closer to the implementation part, without having insights on this part. So in the design of the research methodology, I just selected the part where I'm going to work on data collection using different aspects. The first, definitely the literature review and desk review, and then the interviews with different education organizations at both the central and local level. And the process was very hard because I had to get security approval from the Ministry of Education, and then with this security approval, I had to get another approvals from people to agree to interview me. And then after having this, we have urban governorates, and we have rural governorates, and we have frontier governorates. It was very hard to interview people at the frontier governorates because of security reasons. And at the same time, I had the opportunity to call people from the different governorates to work with them and to encourage them to meet me, especially with the security approval that I have. Some of them, they agreed to meet with me, and some did not agree to meet with me. And this is very normal in the Egyptian context, because usually education officials or officials in general, they became afraid of meeting students and doing research, and they're afraid of what the results would be coming out and what is going to happen later on. So I made sure that there is a representation of the Upper Egypt, representation of the urban governorates, taking into consideration the students' number in these governorates. This was the key determinants and criteria for choosing the governorates, people I talked with in the governorates. At the central level, it was like a purposive sample of the different, because it was like senior level officials at the Ministry of Education, and it was just a bit easy to get to them and talk to them. In terms of the bias, definitely those who didn't want to make interviews with me, there is a non-response bias. There is, you wouldn't have what those people would say if you didn't interview them. So this may had different analytical views if I would interview them. This is number one. But I made sure to have different perspectives. The local level, the central level, the different experts working with the Ministry of Education, a triangulation with the different data sources. This was, I had to watch the social media the Facebook page, the decrees and the laws and the documents published by the Ministry of Education, the different YouTube videos and channels and press conferences of the Ministry. So I had to triangulate in order to ensure the validity and reliability of the data. So I hope this answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then I would like to continue with the opposition with Professor Bouyan. He is online. So please can I give the floor to you? He's a professor at the American University in Cairo.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amira. Thank you, the supervisors. It was a great honor to be present in this defense. I very much enjoyed reading your thesis, Amira. This is a well-written thesis, and I echo what Professor Melissa Siegel said about your thesis. I think, of course, we have still some questions in order to improve the quality of your work. I will ask a question relating to your theoretical issues, particularly the policy tools. You used Hood's NATO, this nodality, authority, territory, and organization. You used that NATO without discussing why you have chosen that one over the other resilient-related theories. Would you please explain that particular point?
Thank you, your highly esteemed opponent, for the compliments and the question. Actually, the use of the NATO taxonomy, the nodality, authority, territory, and organization, was meant to incorporate the perspective of the government choices with the resilience framework. In the NATO taxonomy, for example, if the organization, when it comes to the nodality, for example, the nodality focuses on the communication and dissemination of information. And the authority focuses on the decision-making structure and the laws and decrees published, or the decisions related to the legislative authority and the laws related to the education sector during COVID-19. So, for example, if with the decisions made to decentralize during COVID-19, it has to be a flow of information and transparency between the central and local level. And this is a decision that should be made by the government. It's not only something that goes with the flow. So during COVID, it was witnessed that there was, unlikely before COVID, the Egyptian organizations lacked transparency, right? And there was no transparency between the central and local level. And this out of a sudden with the decisions made to delegate authority to the local level, there was a great deal of transparency and dissemination of information between the central and local level. And this is a decision, and which has affected the resilience of organization. Let's imagine if this was not taken as a decision from the government, then the delegation of authority wouldn't work during COVID-19. So the intention was to merge the idea of the coherence of the policy tools and the government choices with the resilience framework in order to ensure better resilience during disruption. I hope this answered the question.
Thank you, Amira.
Thank you, Dr. Shaja.
Okay, thank you very much. Then the opposition will be continued by Professor Sharif of Cairo University, and he is also a member of the assessment committee, like the first two speakers. So, Professor Sharif, are you there? She's also online. Okay, apparently this is not the case, so I would like to continue then with the next and maybe come back to her later, to the next opponent, and that's Professor Ritsen. Professor Ritsen is a former Minister of Education in the Netherlands and former president of this university, and I would like to hear your opposition, questions and remarks regarding this topic. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pro-Rector. Mrs. Amira Gamal Al-Din, such a pleasure to see you now alive after having read your dissertation, which is so interesting, has so many dimensions. And for me also a bit of a rerun, having spent quite a bit of time at the Ministry of Education in Egypt, and also time with the minister, also time with the universities, but also in Al-Azhar University, which is something you will recognize, but for other people may be a bit opaque. I do think your dissertation is a significant contribution to public administration literature, but I'd like to bring it to a point where you're going to be appointed the minister in Egypt. And what would you do, given the part in your dissertation, which is not as elaborate as I would have hoped it would be, that is on power, bureaucracy, and economic dimensions. That's the context in which the resilience is shaped. And power asymmetries, the bureaucratic inertia, which is not just Egyptian. So in many countries in the low middle income area, the bureaucracy tends to be 40% of the working population, which is quite high compared to international standards. But that's a strong, so as the minister, I could see that you would have a difficult discussion with your civil servants if you would want to move. But also with opaque resource allocation, corruption is a big point. And so some countries have addressed that, like Uganda. And particularly so in this dimension of resilience. And how would you as a minister want to work together with other ministers in the Middle East region who have similar experience, but also sometimes are moved in a different direction, like in Jordan, for example? So a question of how to translate your findings into practice, creating greater resilience.
Thank you very much, highly esteemed opponent, for the compliment and for the question. And I couldn't agree more that having a real and practical implementation impact on this study, for this study on the ground, would be very beneficial. Actually, being a minister in Egypt of education, this is a very, very hard job. It is a very hard job because education yeah, let's be honest, education in Egypt is witnessing great challenges, and especially when it comes to the quality of education, right? So, but the focus of my research is not on the quality of education, but in order to incorporate the dimensions of resilience into the work and the policies and the plans of education organizations, it required lots of work. The bureaucratic nature is everywhere. It's not only in the Ministry of Education or the education sector in Egypt, it's everywhere in the public administration systems around the world. So I think one of the lessons learned from COVID in general is the dilemma of how our public organizations can work more on their flexibility a bit, and to try to diminish the bureaucratic nature while keep in mind the accountability aspect, because the accountability aspect here is very important. You need to hold people account against what they are doing and against the plans that they are initiating. So I think this is a dilemma. But if I am the minister, what I'm going to do is I'll try to bring everyone together. I will try to deeply understand, because one of the pitfalls of the minister, and I attended a session by the Ministry of Education after he left the ministry, and he was a prominent figure, and he was leading the reform program of education, and after COVID he left. And everything went back to the square one from the very beginning, which is the lack of institutional memory and the effect and the impact of the international organizations on the thinking behind what the reform program would be like to work on. So the minister said one of the main problems that he had is the lack of communication. And I think that with proper communication with the different stakeholders, not only at the ministry level, but we are talking about the local level. The local level is very important, and they are the real drivers behind the education system. We cannot neglect them. So if I'm the minister, I will delegate authority to the local level, because when you delegate authority, they just improve. They just work in progress, and they feel responsible, and they just do great things. But we are afraid of delegating authority. This is something that I'm going to do as a minister, but I hope this can work and this can answer your question.
Thank you very much. It does answer my question, and I would vote for you if I were an Egyptian.
Thank you.
Okay, then the opposition will be continued by, and I see now that I can see Professor Sharif. Can you hear me, Professor Sharif? Yeah, so please, could you pose your question to the candidate? Professor Sharif is from Cairo University.
Frozen.
It's frozen, so okay. Then we take the alternative route, and we will continue by the people that here are present, and that's Dr. Marotta. And she is from Maastricht University. You merit. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. Dear candidate, dear Amira, congratulations for completing your research. I enjoyed reading your book and want to praise you for the comprehensive approach you took to the study, using different methods and data to answer your research question. Also, I want to praise you for the passion that you expressed in your acknowledgements, that you express how much you value research and knowledge and the advancement of knowledge. And that actually gave me a very nice motivation to read your work and to read you as a person. So thanks for that. Now that Professor Ritsen already appointed you as a Minister of Education, I would like to continue on those lines. Because when I first read your thesis during the summer, this question did not come to my mind. But when rereading your thesis for this event, I was thinking of a what-if question. So now that you have all your results and the world has changed quite a lot, so for COVID, we relied on technology for communication. And now we are facing a risk of not having technology for communication. So if you were the Minister of Education and you were to build an emergency plan in order to cope with no technology in communication for the educational sector, how that plan would look like based on your findings?
Thank you very much, your esteemed opponent, for the compliments and for the question. So actually, digital learning tools proved very important during COVID-19, right? And I think one concern is the aspect of equity and reaching to those who are in need in the remote areas. This is very important. So if I'm the Minister of Education and working on the digital transformation aspect and the digital learning tools, one of the most important things that I would focus on is how to reach those in remote areas. What are the resources, the physical resources, financial resources, human resources needed to reach these people? It's not only about reaching, but also about educating them how to use such tools. Because people in remote areas are deprived and they are very vulnerable, and maybe they don't have the same opportunities of people in the urban areas, right? So you need to have also a plan of communication and raising their awareness and educating them and being with them. I think this is one of the most important things that as a minister I would do, in addition to understand the resources and build on, work with the private sector, work with other financing options in order to work and to build the digital capacity of education sector.
May I follow up?
Yeah.
Thanks. So my question was going, thanks for the answer, in the lines of what happened if the country faces a cyber attack and there is no access to technology and you need the organization to continue operationalizing. How would you use your results to propose an emergency plan to be preventive? At this stage, I think that we are in the need of having prevention to this problem. So how would you face that, or how will you frame that prevention to your country?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting and very nice question, yeah. But I think, part of the emergency planning, we already know that there is a risk of cybersecurity around the world. Yeah. And I believe that in Egypt, actually, our public organizations are not ready to deal with cyber attacks, right? And I think that I have to acknowledge this, as a matter of fact. And in my emergency planning, I have to have options. What if I don't have this? So I will revert back to the normal education system, the normal one, the traditional one, using the same approach that I'm using now, without jeopardizing the education and the process of education. And I think I should acknowledge the risk of cybersecurity and just put a plan how to deal with this if I don't have a system. Because how to make, maybe for example, having the community leaders working with the education officials at the local level, going to the schools physically with the students and teaching them. This would be another plan. It should be considered in the planning, and it shouldn't be just focusing on that. We have digital transformation, everything is digitized, and we are fine. There is no security, cybersecurity. No, we have to acknowledge that there is a huge risk of cybersecurity and the attacks, especially in the moments that we are in.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. I see Professor Sherif moving on the screen. So can you hear me, Professor Sherif?
Okay, yes, I could hear you fine.
Okay, great. So then it's now your turn for to ask the question for the opposition. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Amira, for your very comprehensive dissertation. It was very eye-opening to when reading it, and I think you've done a great job, actually. For the sake of policy coherence and intergovernmental collaboration and coordination, I just wanted to ask you the whole of government approach in dealing with resilient public sector organizations. Is it possible in the case of Egypt, and to do so, what would you recommend?
Thank you, your highly esteemed opponent, for the compliment and the question. As for the coordination mechanisms and the whole of government approach, it is very important to consider during COVID-19, or the case of Egypt showed the importance of communication and coordination internally and externally. Internally, between the education organizations at the central and local level, and within the education organizations, whether at the local level or at the central level. And when it comes to the whole of government approach with the external government bodies, it was very important showing that Egypt during COVID-19 followed an approach of external coordination that is based on the coordination between the different concerned ministries. For example, in the Ministry of Education, for the coordination on the exams, the grade 12 exams, there was a committee between both the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Health working around the clock to ensure, and the Ministry of Interior, to ensure that all students are safe and everything, the process is going well and smooth during COVID-19. This was the approach of coordination in addition to the operation room. There was a huge operation room besides the Ministry of Health, taking into consideration the different the other ministries with a core partner, the Ministry of Education. Also at the cabinet level, there was an operation room. It was not working daily, but it was working also receiving periodic reports from the different ministries and ministries on the status of COVID. So I think the coordination also, it's not only the coordination with the government entities, but there is also the coordination with the development partners in order to the Ministry of Education to convey the needs of the ministry and the support needed from the development partners through the coordination meetings with the development partners. So they sat with the minister, and we just need your support in terms of raising awareness, and so on, so and so and so. So there were different coordination mechanisms, and actually the coordination and communication, constant communication during COVID-19 was very important, and is a very important capacity when it comes to the resilience. Therefore, the new redesigned organizational assessment tool, takes into consideration the internal and external coordination and communication separately because of their importance. I hope this answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You've done a great job.
Thank you.
Then the opposition will be continued by Dr. van der Laar. She's at UNU Merit at Maastricht University. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear candidate, dear Amira, I also would like to congratulate you with the completion of the thesis. As you know, I very much like the topic, and we had several discussions on this over the past years. And I really appreciated reading the book. And I also fully agree that the institutional resilience building is not a structured process that goes over phases, but it's a rather messy process. So I was happy to read that. I also observed in your book that there's a tension between centralization and flexibility, which I guess opponents Ritze and Marotta also picked up on. This becomes very clear to me in chapter 6, where you review the development of the organizational resilience during the 3 COVID stages, And you summarize that in page 201, table 16. You know, Egypt is currently a party-based authoritarian regime, and it's not really a true democracy, even though the constitution claims it to be a democracy. And I think centralization in the case of Egypt could reflect a lack of genuine democratic institutions, and hence it might affect institutional flexibility. In your table, you inform us that various elements that during COVID were kind of liberalized, moved back into more centralized form after the COVID years. And this is very much in line with educational learning theories, where we see that during trainings or events, there's a massive learning curve, learning improvement during the event, but then there's an almost equally steep forgetting curve after the event. Unless we actually practice what we learn and implement what we learn, we will not gain much in the longer run. And in Egypt, as you inform, various strategic plans of the educational sector plans include learning lessons from COVID, but no implementation plans. They tend to be very unclear. So here's my question. Can you inform me, based on your evidence, if you believe that institutional learning actually took place in the years after the pandemic, or if we see a decrease in institutional learning post-pandemic? And related to this, because you highlight that indeed there is, with UNICEF, the research and the projects on the learning loss, which I assume is the learning loss for the students in the schools. Do you know if there are measures to avoid learning loss for the institutions, to review their own performance and their own resilience within the ministries and within the educational institutions? Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi, esteemed opponent, for the compliments and for the question. Actually, yes, I totally agree with you when it comes to the learnings in such a centralized context. One of the, as I said in my presentation, that one of the learnings was at the individual level, at the local level, they learned how to improve their managerial skills. And I really believe this because of the delegated authority. You gave them the authority and they felt responsible and they felt they have the responsibility and they felt like their managerial skills. Is it continuous? I doubt. I truly doubt because as you said, it is important to continue practicing. Everything was decentralized during COVID-19 was temporary, and everything went back to the central system. And then this makes those people who learned at the individual level lose their learning, right? And then maybe another disruption comes, and then maybe decentralization, some decentralized decisions would be provided to the local level, and then maybe they learn more after that, and then it's vicious circle unless you have a specific institutional reform that you would work on in order to keep these capacities up and working. And for the learning losses, when it comes to one of the core problems that is highlighted in the thesis is the lack of reports related to the programs and related to the implementation of the education sector plans. It's just the plans comes out and you don't find any progress report. You find that these kind of policies that we will decentralize the management of education, that we will incorporate trainings on the crisis management and resilience and so on and so forth, but you don't find any way or any report that talks about how the implementation on the ground works. So there are no evidence or no reports regarding the learning losses, or even if there are learning losses in terms of the organizations. One of the components of the resilience was the reflection after COVID-19. And this was done unofficially, informally between the employees. It was not that formally at the organization level you bring people and you say, what we learned from COVID, how we incorporate this into our organizations. This was not happened. So yeah, I hope this answers the question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we are running a little bit ahead of schedule. So this means that we have some time for additional questions. So I would like to kindly ask the members of the degree committee to see if there are any second round questions. So I'm looking particularly at Professor Ritsen.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, I have more questions, and I particularly can ask them because you are so in the debate and you are so well informed. So I feel not ill at ease to put you in that spot. Where I start with, I have two related questions, and that's on COVID and academic achievement, how schools function. So I go one step beyond, say, having education continuing, but also on achievement. First, there is the literature on Hanushek, which one way or another was not connected. That's Eric Hanushek, who writes a lot about the role of autonomy for achievement. He makes cross-country comparisons. And he comes out with a very strong, it's quantitative research, a very strong factor, significant, that more autonomy means generally, on average, higher PISA results. So that would lead to the question whether that is not a general perspective. You pointed very much out to the social cohesion and to capitalize on social cohesion, but that's actually the thought which Hanushek also proposes, a strong social network that is everywhere a support for education. So why not decentralized everywhere? And it's a bit, of course, in terms of realizing that there was a bureaucratic structure which goes against decentralization, and that those countries which did decentralize had an opportunity, and quite often an opportunity which came from unsuspected sources, like in the Netherlands, from schools which were based on freedom of religion. So that led to an autonomous system which is unequaled in the world, except for Israel, which also has such a system. So that is a general question, whether your conclusion with respect to social cohesion shouldn't be pushed further in the sense of, in any case, decentralization and local autonomy should be important. And a bit related here also to the COVID research, the international COVID research, which points to a very different fact. Denmark did the best in terms of post-COVID learning in schools. And why was that? Because the Danes were able to resist the pressure from teacher unions to close down schools. So it's a very different item. Didn't have anything to do with decentralization. The Danes are actually pretty highly centralized. But it had to do with power structures, the bureaucratic structures, and with teachers. So in the Netherlands also, schools didn't close down because there was evidence that that would be better for children. No, it was better for teachers. And understandable, and that was the general practice. So you didn't point out that maybe also that had an impact on COVID resilience. That is, well, it's a general point for you as minister, a general point. How do you deal with trade unions and with their personal interests apart from the educational interests?
Yeah. So we, in Egypt, we don't have the trade union structure. And so in Egypt, let me first talk about the social network. You know, in Egypt, the system is centralized, and dealing with the private sector by social network here in this research, in the operationalization of this research, I mean the private sector, civil society, and development partners, right? And their support to the education sector throughout the process. In a centralized system like Egypt, it is really hard to work with the private sector and civil society but it is more acceptable to work with the development partners at the central level, right? Because they provide funding, they just sit and talk about the plans and policies and so on and so forth. But with the private sector and civil society, it is a bit, you need to take security approvals, right? So with COVID, when COVID hits, they had to deal with the support of the private sector and civil society, especially at the local level. They didn't have enough resources coming from the ministry, and they had to deal with it, and they had to accept it. So education organizations at the local level, they felt the benefit of dealing with such organizations. Although in a later stage with COVID, the central ministry felt like everything is out of our control. No, we need to take approvals again on just cooperating with the private sector and civil society, take security approval from the Ministry of Education at the central level. So it was very beneficial during COVID to work and expand on these networks. And this was a lesson learned to the people at the local level, because they helped a lot. They helped a lot in the masks and everything, in raising awareness campaigns, in supporting the schools, in supporting the teachers and everything. So they felt that there are other options other than the ministry and whatever comes from the central ministry that they can rely on. And this is for the social network. Also, the other thing that I want to highlight is the culture. It was Netherlands, it's the culture. It's that the culture plays an important role in the resilience. For example, in Egypt, people, they have this relationship with God. They feel like, no, we did what we have to do, and it's all in God's hands. We have to do this because we need to save lives and everything. So in their talking, they always refer to God, and you feel like the resilience part comes also with the culture of relying on God. So the culture plays an important role in the resilience of education organizations, of the organizations in general, because this is part of the community, this is part of the society. And the society and the education organizations are formed from those who are coming from the community at the end. Yes. I hope this.
Thank you very much. Gives me a great picture of also the challenges ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So then there is still room for one final question. So I would like to ask the opponents here present and also online if there is a question. Yes, Professor Siegel.
Yes, thank you so much. So, dear candidate, doing a PhD project is something that takes several years. And knowing what you know now, is there anything that you would do differently if you would start from the beginning?
Thank you very much, your highly esteemed opponent, for the question. Yes, actually, I would love to, or I would have to have the opportunity to work on the other side. In this research, I worked on the supply side of education. I wish to have the opportunity in my country to work on the other side, to see what are the impact of the measures undertaken by the Ministry of Education and Education sector on the beneficiaries, how they received it. Was it very responsive as we see in the supply side or not? But this was very difficult, and I like a study published in 2024. They worked on something similar in Lithuania, and they had two surveys. One.
You can briefly finish your question.
One just for one with the education officials and survey with the beneficiaries, and this is very important. But thank you. Hopefully in another time.
Thank you.
Okay, dear candidate Amira Gamal Eldin, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed now. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and the defense, and I request you and your audience to wait the results of our deliberations, and we will return back in this room soon. Dear Amira Gamal Eldin, dear candidate, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Dr. Nieme is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom, and I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Please all rise. Dear Amira, do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
I promise.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Amira Gamal Eldin, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I will now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee and affixated with the official seal of the university.
Please be seated.
So the word is to your promoter.
Mabruk ya Doctor. Distinguished members of the committee, colleagues, family and friends in the aula and online. It is my great honor today to deliver this laudatio for Dr. Amira Gamal Eldin on behalf of Professors Khalid Zakaria and Michal Natorsky, who are also present online. Allow me to begin with the name Amira. Amira in Arabic means princess. And while titles are symbolic, Amira's case, the symbolism is strikingly fitting. Not in the sense of superiority, but in the sense of dignity, strength, and responsibility. Throughout her doctoral journey, Amira carried herself with quiet determination, a commitment, and a deep sense of purpose, truly befitting someone destined to lead. And I say destined to lead without exaggeration. I think we started to feel a little bit of this energy in the room today and in the defense. When I think of what future public policy scholarship should look like, grounded in evidence, courageous in inquiry, and anchored in a vision for societal betterment, I think of you. I can sincerely imagine Amira in the future taking on indeed the role of Egypt's Minister of Education, a position which I think you will be exceptionally well suited for. Amira's dissertation examined resilience in Egypt's public education sector, but I think without intending to, you also wrote a story about your own resilience. Amira began her journey during one of the most disruptive periods of our lifetime, the COVID-19 pandemic, when Egypt, like much of the world, was struggling to maintain services, manage uncertainty, and ensure continuity of education. And conducting in-depth research under normal conditions is already difficult. Doing so during lockdowns, institutional closures, and widespread constraints required another caliber of commitment. You were also part of a cohort that faced disruptions within our own institute. As part of the PhD program, once known as GPAC, so we were saying we still consider you a GPAC, it underwent major changes, and being from a cohort caught in the middle of this transition was also not easy. But I do think you managed it with grace and patience and steady focus on your work. Amira's research offered a detailed and systematic examination of how education systems anticipated, coped, and adapted during different phases of the pandemic. She supported it with interviews, document analyses, careful process tracing. It was rigorous and solid and analytically rich. But behind the pages lies an untold story, the story of doors that remained closed, approvals that took a long time, security clearances, interviews that were hard to secure, or the moment you get to the interview, decisions were made they were not going to go through with the interviews. Moments filled with disappointment and tears, all while Amira was working full-time, yet still meeting her deadlines and sticking to her planning. Researching sensitive public sector issues in Egypt under such conditions demands persistence, diplomacy, and patience, and a lot of determination that I think a few can sustain, and you demonstrated each one of those. Being part of Amira's supervisory team was a true joy. Our team worked together with ease and energy, and your constant preparedness, your thoughtful engagement made every meeting productive, fulfilling, and truly enjoyable. The last months of your PhD were far from easy. The freeze on US foreign aid and the dissolution of USAID meant that you suddenly lost your position. An unexpected and painful setback, which most people would have stepped back or reconsidered everything. But you did not do that. You did the opposite. You were resilient, and you used this setback as a motivation to move forward even faster. And you grounded yourself even more deeply in your work, and you continued pursuing questions which you believed matter to Egypt's future. This determination, Amira, reflects the very essence of resilience, not just studied, but lived. Now, Amira's thesis today invited us to reflect on the value of international higher education. And here I have to highlight the significance of having Professor Joritse on the assessment committee today. As was mentioned, the former Minister of Education of the Netherlands and also the former president of Maastricht University, Jo was one of the people who long championed the idea that international higher education strengthens societies by bringing diverse perspectives together. And I think your journey today is a very good example of this. And us being together is also a very good example of how you bring people and views together. Amira took the tools, methods, and academic traditions that she learned here in Maastricht University, and she applied them to challenges deeply rooted in Egypt's culture and public sector. And her work was shaped by both worlds, exactly how we intended it to be. Grounded in a national context, but yet informed by global scholarship. And in this sense, I think Jo's presence is more than symbolic because it underscores how international education reminds us that knowledge is global, that our challenges are interconnected, and that the progress is only possible when we learn together, when we are open to share, also make mistakes. And today, more than ever, the world needs scholars like you. People who can bridge context, who can carry insights across borders, use them to drive meaningful change back at home. And Amira brings the same spirit of openness, collaboration, and global-mindedness into her work and into her interactions. What distinguishes Amira is not only her academic excellence, but her character. Throughout her PhD journey, she was consistently giving. She would never come to Maastricht without presents and very nice sweets. I think Michal can also attest to that. She was always courteous and genuinely considerate of everyone around her. And in moments where others would feel overwhelmed, Amira showed a lot of character, but something extremely rare. She never complained. She carried challenges with quiet dignity, focusing on solutions and not obstacles. Amira, you're kind of a doctoral researcher who uplifts those around you. You're generous, you're supportive towards your peers, and you're always respectful and grateful in your interactions with everybody. Your warmth and humility have been always constant, and I was particularly lucky to get to know you, and our conversations and discussions were always dear to me, and I look forward to many more. These qualities shine in your acknowledgements, where both Michal and I, we were arguing we don't deserve that. But again, we really appreciate this profound gratitude about people who supported you, and you express your hope to make a meaningful difference in Egypt, in your country, and the wider world. So before closing, I would like to congratulate also your parents. I think they're listening online. So to Dr. and Dr. Alf Mabrouk ala Amira, who are following us, as I said, online. Also to your family, to your brother who is here, and your friends who came. It has been a privilege accompanying you. Each step in your career brings you closer to the impact that you seek. Do not doubt, Be bold, keep questioning, and may your dedication continue to guide you towards meaningful service. I am sure your future will contribute to Egypt and the world. Congratulations, we are all very proud of you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Dr. Gamal Eldin. Finally, we can add the doctor to your name. Also on behalf of Maastricht University and the School of Business and Economics, I congratulate you wholeheartedly with the degree you have acquired. I also would like to thank the promoter, the supervisor, the supervisors, also online here present, and also the members of the committee. I think we all made this a nice and memorable event, although we also were able to pose the necessary questions. So thank you very much. Have a great day. We will stay here for a moment to take a picture and also go outside later on the stairs to take another picture. But this picture here, I would like to ask the members of the committee that are online to stay here so we can incorporate them also in the picture here in the room. Thank you very much, and hereby I close this academic ceremony.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Dr. Amira, please come forward. Please bring the degree.